GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And a very good evening. Yes, it's 7 o'clock. It's the Farage show. He's still down under, so I'm standing in. We've got a massive show. Unbelievable things going on this week. On Thursday, some more net migration numbers are coming out. And guess what, folks? Yes, another surge is forecast. So much for taking back control. Also, here's another shocker. Seeing a GP quickly is easier in Rwanda than here in the United Kingdom. Brilliant. And also another shocker, the COVID inquiry. What's been said over the last couple of days, we'll be getting into that. And of course, what do the Australians, the Aussies think of Farage Down Under? All of that to come, but first, it's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Police searching for a group of missing teenagers say they've recovered 4 bodies from a crashed car in North Wales. A major search was launched after Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Henderson and Hugo Morris failed to return home from a camping trip in the Snowdonia area on Sunday. Police confirmed their car left the road near Tremadog. Superintendent Owain Llewellyn says it appears to have been a tragic accident.
Shortly after 10 a.m. this morning, a member of the public contacted us reporting a vehicle having left the road between Beddgelert and Llanfrothen. Police officers attended and located a Ford Fiesta vehicle upside down, partially submerged in water. Tragically, the bodies of 4 young males were recovered from within the vehicle.
The national living wage will increase by almost 10%. More than 2 million full-time workers are set to benefit from a pay rise of more than £1,800 a year from next April. The announcement comes ahead of tomorrow's autumn statement. US officials say a tentative deal between Israel and Hamas that could see a pause in fighting and the release of hostages has been agreed. It would see the release of 50 hostages, mostly women and children, in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners and a pause of 4 or 5 days. US President Joe Biden says they're very close to getting those hostages freed. The government's most senior advisor during the COVID pandemic says the plan in place before the pandemic was woefully deficient. The inquiry heard evidence from Sir Chris Whitty today. He said the plan had been drawn up by people who'd been through the swine flu, where the mortality rate was quite low. He also said policy decisions regarding quarantining were difficult. Lancashire Police has been criticised for its handling of the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. A review found failings in the way personal information about Ms. Bulley's health struggles was disclosed to the press, which contributed to wild speculation. It said that non-reportable background information should have been provided to the media to help shape responsible reporting without disclosing sensitive information. College of Policing CEO Chief Constable Andy Marsh admitted the way the police released information was needless. And the president of South Korea says his country will work with the UK to bolster the political and economic security in the Indo-Pacific during an address to Parliament this evening. Earlier, the King and Queen welcomed Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife at the Horse Guards Parade. It's the first incoming state visit since the King's coronation and the second of his reign. The couple laid a wreath at the grave of the unknown warrior at Westminster Abbey. And a state banquet will take place this evening, which is set to host 170 guests. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News.
Thank you, Tatiana, and a very warm welcome. Yes, it's Farage Show on GB News. We have got a huge story this week, amongst everything else that is going on, because on Thursday we've got the latest ONS statistics on net migration into the United Kingdom for the year to June 2023. Now, this is important because you'll recall that record net migration figures were announced about 5 months ago for the year to December 2022. And then we were told it was exceptional. We were told they would come down. Do you remember that manifesto back in December 2019 when the Conservative government of the day, they promised in the manifesto that immigration would come down and the numbers would reduce, particularly of low-skilled immigration. Before I go to my two guests here in the studio, just take a listen to the Immigration Minister, what he said, Robert Jenrick, to the House of Commons back in May of this year.
The ONS have today amended their previous published estimate of net migration for the year ending June 2022 to 606,000. The statistics published today indicate that net migration has flatlined since then. In the year ending December 2022, they estimate that net migration remains at 606,000. These particularly high figures are in large part due to temporary and exceptional factors, such as the UK's Ukraine and Hong Kong BNO schemes. Last year, more than 200,000 Ukrainians and 150,000 Hong Kong British nationals overseas made use of the routes to life or time in the United Kingdom.
So there we have the Immigration Minister, Mr. Jenrick, saying last year was exceptional. In which case, you'd sort of draw the conclusion, not unreasonably, that they might come down. He proudly said the numbers were flatlining. Really? So internal sources that have leaked news forecasts to the Daily Mail this morning says that actually it could well be 700,000 in the year to June 2023. So far from the promise from the government back in May that last year was exceptional, it looks as though actually it's exceptional in that the graph is going upwards rapidly, not downwards. So I pose my question to you, everybody. Given that this government is completely incapable of controlling immigration, the question is, Will Labour control immigration any better? Email farage@gbnews.com or tweet us, #Farage on GB News. Well, I'm delighted to be joined with my two guests in the studio by Dr. Alan Mendoza, who is the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, and Scott Benton, who's the Independent MP for Blackpool South. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to come to you first, Alan. What's going on here? I mean, if these forecasts that have been leaked to the Daily Mail are correct, in the year to June 23, 700,000 net, so that's the difference between those arriving and those leaving, that's 1% of the population in 1 year. What on earth is happening?
Well, that's going to be the question, isn't it? What on earth is happening? It's interesting. We've had a big focus, haven't we, Richard, on illegal migration over the past few years, the small boats, etc., and ignoring the fact that there's a much bigger legal migration issue. Now, I say it's an issue. It depends on, you've got to slice the cake and work out what's going on here. I think, there was in the past the Ukraine case, the Hong Kong case, the Afghan case. There were cases that explained this, but those are petering out now. So what's explaining this massive jump in numbers, if this is indeed correct? And we need to know whether these are temporary student things, if they're work permits being issued, is it an attempt to get cheap labour in, is it an attempt to bring people in past the world? What is it?
We know that work visas are up 45%, right. OK? We know also that existing foreign workers have extended visas significantly. You've touched on a really significant point, which is student numbers. Because these numbers only include a percentage, it seems, of the overall student visas, which for the year, I think, to June 23, was some 650,000, compared to 4 or 5 years ago, it was just 200,000, and many of those are not included. So, I mean, this is more than a surge, it's like a torrent.
Yes, it is a torrent, and I think what's interesting with this is, if you're looking at people who are here for the foreseeable future, what is the integration strategy for these people to come into this country? Because, one person, if there's no integration strategy, is a problem. If it's 1.3 million, you've got a huge situation on your hands.
Absolutely right. Well, let's turn now to Scott. Thank you for being with us. What's the impact? I mean, you're an MP. You stood in the last election on the basis of reducing immigration, particularly low-skilled immigration. What's the impact on your constituents, and how do you think they will react if these forecasts prove to be right on Thursday?
Well, when the British public are asked, time and time again, they want to see net migration figures reduced. And I'm afraid over the last 25 years, we've seen exponential growth in immigration, firstly under Tony Blair and the Labour government, and since then the Conservative government. You mentioned the manifesto I stood on, Richard, which pledged to reduce net migration numbers. And despite that, we are seeing probably 2 successive years of immigration, net immigration, in excess of 600,000. That is not what the British people want, and they expect us as a government to drive down those figures. That is not happening. My constituents will rightly be absolutely furious. And
because the number when the last general election was, the net number was about 250 to 300,000, as I recall. So you're looking at well over a doubling and rising 4 years later.
Absolutely, and the media often focus upon the illegal immigration problem. It's the legal migration part which is putting such a huge pressure on public services, on housing in this country. For example, my constituents can't find an NHS dentist. They have huge problems finding social housing, public services are under immense pressure, and yet we are seeing these record migration figures year upon year.
I mean, these, of course, one follows the other. Frankly, as night follows day. It's pretty obvious. If you increase your population by 10 million in 20 years, then you need to grow all of your public services accordingly. If you're increasing your population net by 1% in 1 year, that's 10% in 10 years at this rate. I mean, the reality is that the government's completely misled us. I mean, some would say because some of this is deliberate. They set the threshold for their supposed skilled worker visa so low that essentially it was open borders.
I absolutely agree. And don't forget, in 2016, the majority of people who voted to leave the EU did so because of immigration. So people voted in the EU referendum. They've returned 2 successive Conservative governments since then with a pledge to drive down net migration, and that hasn't happened. And people will rightly be incredibly upset and asking questions about why the government aren't driving down these figures, and they are increasing year upon year.
So there's another point to this, Alan, which is that the ONS, in their infinite wisdom, they keep revising the method of calculating the numbers. And they did it 6 months ago, and I think they've announced that in 2 days' time, they're going to revise the numbers again and also look back. I mean, the slightly cynic in me says that they might be cooking the books. Am I being completely unfair?
Well, they might be cooking the books the other way, actually, ironically, and including more people in figures that should have been included many years ago. Maybe we always had a bigger problem than we actually realised. There is that potential. Unless you know what the actual mechanism is that they're looking at, it's difficult to make that prediction.
So I suppose, looking at it from the other side of the debate, many will say, economists, possibly some from part of the Conservative Party, that actually lawful immigration is a good thing. It grows the size of the economy and brings in more people to fill jobs. We've got a labour shortage. So that's their line of argument. What's your answer to that, given all the pressures we're seeing?
Well, that's an argument, and this is why this is such a nuanced issue, because, of course, you've got this point. If you're bringing in people who are going to do jobs, they're going to pay tax as well. There is that sort of side there, and you're looking, therefore, at potentially growing the economy. But the flip side is what Scott was saying, the infrastructure question. You can't just bring this amount of people into the country, even if they pay tax, without the infrastructure to support them. And you also can't do it if you don't have an integration strategy to essentially say, right, you're in the UK, British values time, you're British citizens, or you're going to become, not British citizens, but you're going to become part of this society. You're going to be part of it. And we've seen, haven't we, in the last few weeks, the implications of that. If you don't have that, you have people on your streets disrespecting our war memorials, etc., and things like that happening.
Absolutely right. So, Scott, we may hear in the autumn statement from Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, tomorrow, a reference to what they call the starting point at which people can come with skilled worker visas. I touched that it was down at about 26,000. They're talking about increasing it maybe to £30,000 a year. Do you think that's enough? Do you think that will make any change? The government might say, well, actually, this is going to cure the issue. What do you say to that? Or would you like to see the threshold much, much higher?
I think there's a number of things which the government has to do at the moment. Not just stop the boats and the illegal immigration aspect, but also putting a cap on the number of refugees which come here every year, closing down some of the student loophole routes, which, for example, means somebody can graduate and for 2 years afterwards they can stay in this country without a job. We need to look at that. And as you've said as well, we need to raise the salary threshold. I would say that needs to be above £40,000. Encouraging noises coming out from Robert Jenrick, but I would say it's not enough and he has to go further if this government is serious about driving down net migration, which is what my constituents expect to see.
Well, you see it in your postbag, I'm absolutely sure. Gentlemen, thank you so much indeed. 2 days to go before that number is released. Keep an eye on that, folks. We will be coming back to that on Thursday evening. Now, next, we've been talking about Rwanda a lot, about is it a safe country or not. It looks as though it's a pretty good place to go if you want to see a GP very quickly. All of that after the break.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage on GB News. Well, that was a fascinating discussion about lawful migration, the numbers from the ONS coming out on Thursday. We will be looking at that with detailed interest, particularly this point about changing the method of calculation. I have to say, I'm pretty suspicious. We will be digging into that with great detail. Now, the question was, of course, well, if the Tories are struggling to control the numbers, maybe the Labour Party will do better. Will Labour be better at controlling immigration? Jeff says the government has no intention of reducing immigration. What evidence do we have to the contrary? Well, the evidence is the numbers appear to be heading north, not south. Mick says legal and illegal immigration are out of control. Labour will not deal with this because they opened the gates in the first place. There's some truth to that, Mick. But actually, the truth is the Tories' deliberate policy post the last election with their skilled worker visas have actually made it significantly worse, not only on the worker visas, but also on the student visas. Jazz says, Labour, don't make me laugh. I'm sorry about that, Jazz. The people who vote them in would be... let's try that again. The people who vote them in better be prepared for an amnesty on illegal immigration and unlimited legal immigration. Jazz is pretty clear. Richard says, finally, will Labour do any better? Simply no. There you are. I think that's pretty comprehensive from all of you. Keep those coming in. It's great to get your thoughts. Now, the second story. I mean, last week we heard from our Supreme Court judges. Yes, the country of Rwanda in Africa is unsafe. It's an unsafe country. OK, that's their judgment. Well, it may be. I don't know. I've never been there. But it turns out, according to a report from The Economist called The Economist Global Health Index, that the same country, Rwanda, is substantially better than the United Kingdom for seeing a GP. You couldn't make it up, really, could you? It's easier to see a GP in the unsafe country of Rwanda in Africa than here in the UK. In fact, Britain is the third worst place in the world to see a GP in either 24 hours or 7 days to see a family doctor. I suspect many of you are not surprised by that finding. Well, let's speak to my next guest down the line, Dr. Lawrence Buckman, who's a former GP and also the BMA UK GPs Committee chair. Lawrence, thank you so much indeed for being with us. You may have seen this report from The Economist, from their Global Health Index. Were you surprised by, that pretty stark comparison between a developing nation, Rwanda in Africa, that apparently is unsafe to go to, but if you get there, the good news is you can see a GP within a day. Not much chance here in the UK. What do you think to this?
I'm not surprised at all. I predicted it 20, 25 years ago. It was obvious it was going to happen, and it has. And I'm not pleased to be one of the many people who said I told them so. And we're now in the health service chaos that was obviously going to come.
And I guess, Lawrence, it's not surprising. You talked about it 15, 20 years ago. But if you allow a population of a nation to increase by 10 million, then surely you've got to plan for all the related impacts of that, whether it's housing, whether it's hospital beds, whether it's doctors, whether it's dentists. It doesn't seem to me to be rocket science.
No, but it equally isn't rocket science to know that when the numbers of working GPs is going to plummet in the future, which is now, in fact, it was about 5 years ago it plummeted, then when the numbers plummeted, the number of patients, even if there's no change in the population size, the number of patients who couldn't get access in a reasonable time frame was inevitably going to rocket. And that's what's happened. I don't think any GPs are proud of this, by the way.
No, I'm sure not, apart from anything else, because, of course, there's a massive increase in the pressure of work for GPs. So the data I've got here, Lawrence, for England, there's 7.8 GPs per 10,000 of population. The OECD average is 10.8. So we're about 25 to 30% down on the OECD average. Does that strike you as being about right from your experience?
I think it's worse than that. The reason it's worse is because a lot of GPs don't work full-time anymore. I'm the last dinosaur generation that saw patients across the entire working week. Now GPs can't work at that pace, and I understand why. And I would suspect that those numbers are not completely accurate. They're probably measuring number of humans rather than whole-time equivalents. So the number of doctors who work part-time has risen enormously over the last 20 years, and partly because they can't cope with working a 10-session week, plus weekends and out of hours.
So there's data that suggests that we need some 16,000 more GPs. That's about a 44% increase. How are we going to find those GPs, Lawrence? Maybe actually we should do like a reverse Rwanda treaty, and instead of sending illegal migrants to Rwanda, maybe we should go to Rwanda and ask them if we can borrow some doctors for about 5 years.
Well, we've been doing that for quite a long time. We've been raiding the old Commonwealth and the new Commonwealth for doctors. But of course, they need them too. They're not very keen on seeing all their doctors run away. And even though doctors do come to this country, we have a lot of doctors come in temporarily. But the fact is, there's nowhere near enough. And I'm sorry to say that we had a big supply from the European Union, large supply, particularly from Holland, Denmark and Germany. And that's gone. So we've got a supply of doctors no longer there. And, we can raid other countries to get more doctors, but it's not going to solve 16,000 extra doctors.
No, but so Lawrence, why is the government persisting with, as I understand, they've still got a cap on training places for UK-based graduates, students who want to train in medicine to become a GP, hopefully, and there's still a cap on those places? That's right, isn't it?
It is. It's mysterious. I'm sure it has something to do with money, I would guess. But it isn't anything to do with need, because we clearly need an enormous expansion. 44% expansion, that sounds about right. Well, you're not going to get that without the 10-year time it takes to grow GPs or to grow other healthcare workers. We need doctors, nurses, all the other people. We don't run our plant 24 hours a day because we haven't got the staff to man it. We could be running scanners 24 hours a day if we had enough radiographers. We don't have any of those things in place. We've let it happen, and now we're staring at I was told I was a shroud waver at the turn of the century, and now, what a surprise, it's all going wrong.
Well, there's a lot to be done. Lawrence, thank you so much indeed for joining me. That's Dr. Lawrence Buckman, former GP and BMA UK GPs Committee Chair. Well, coming up after the break, of course, you know where Nigel is. He's down under. It's quite a bit revealing yesterday evening, wasn't it? We'll be coming to that straight after the break to see the latest with Ben Leo.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage here on GB News. Well, you may have stayed up last night, you may have watched I'm a Celebrity, and of course, Nigel was having to do some, frankly, pretty horrific trials, just all sorts of stuff. Quite a revealing episode as well. Let's just take a quick sort of summary of some of the things that we saw last night.
This one's horrible.
Yeah.
Right.
Is this staying on the menu or
off?
Must be shaved. This is not good.
You took the whole plum in one go there, Nigel.
Yeah.
Vomit fruit, fermented tofu, and fermented plums.
This has the potential to really depress you for weeks. Good God.
Oh, God.
Is this what it's come to?
Oh, there's a bit dripping.
It's the worst thing I've ever...
I can't speak, it's that bad.
It seemed indescribably awful. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Oh, dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
I've got to be honest, I know Nigel quite well. It's not often you see him lost for words, but that, I think it's fair to say, did look indescribably awful. Dear, oh dear, it really did. No chance of me wanting to do that. Now, I think the guy who's got the best job at the moment, he's on the Gold Coast, is our very own Ben Leo. We can go to him now. There it is. I think it's probably fairly early in the morning. So, Ben, lucky you down there. What's the latest down under, my friend?
G'day, Richard. Well, look, hallelujah. It's not raining today. Not yet, anyway. It's just started spitting, so thankfully I don't look like a drowned rat this morning. But talking of dead animals, didn't Nigel do well last night? Jungle Pizzeria. I know you just played a menu that he scoffed on the show last night. Camel udder, sheep udder, cow's teat, camel behind, and croc reproductive organ, let's say. He took it down extremely well, as you saw. What a star. And it also went down well with the viewers as well back home. Lots of congratulatory messages for him on social media. Elsewhere, Rishi Sunak, of all people today, asked if he's been watching I'm a Celebrity. His official spokesman said, "I strongly doubt it," perhaps because Nigel's not going to be on tonight's show doing a trial. What to come tonight, though, for Nigel? He does have a rather emotional chat with the campmates about his infamous plane crash where he nearly died, of course, some years ago. And on a more serious note, I tweeted yesterday about right-wingers, GB News fans, Nigel fans taking offence at what I think are quite funny jokes from Anton Deck about Nigel and the channel. It's all in good jest. However, since then, I have to just pick up on ITV's Lorraine Kelly, who, off the back of those rather funny scenes of Nigel last night, naked in the shower, where Josie Gibson strolled past, looked up and saw Nigel's bare behind. Lorraine Kelly, I don't know if you saw, but on her show yesterday morning, or was it this morning your time, basically taking the mick and body-shaming Nigel, saying that she couldn't believe he was 59, saying that he looks much older, yeah, laughing and cackling away with two other female guests. And in fact, she said, I guess you get the face you deserve, talking about Nigel's look. So let me just say, Lorraine, could you imagine the uproar if that was me, you, Richard Tice, Patrick Christie saying that about a female? The double standards are staggering. But look, on a lighter note, I had some fun yesterday on the Gold Coast here. I had the strenuous job of traipsing up and down the golden beaches here, asking the locals whether they knew Nigel Farage and what they thought of him. Check this out. Ben Leo, GB News. What do the Aussies know about Nigel Farage? Who's that?
I don't know.
Nigel Farage, have you heard of him?
Never.
Yeah, that's Nigel Farage. Well, he's a Pommy. He was on the European Union at one stage.
That's right. He led the Brexit campaign.
Yeah, yeah.
Red?
Yeah, it's I think in the government, but I don't know who it is.
Tony Blair.
No. Tony Blair?
Nigel Farage.
Are you a fan of Farage? What do you think of him?
Absolutely not.
No. You know he's in the jungle?
Is he?
The I'm a Celeb jungle, yeah.
Hopefully they leave him there.
Are you a fan of Farage?
Not particularly, no. Oh, I'd be a Remain.
Remainer?
100% Remain, yeah.
Now you know Farage is in the jungle, are you going to hammer the phones to make sure he does all the trials?
That'd be good, yeah.
Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
Who is it?
Nigel Farage.
Are you a fan of his?
No.
No? Because of Brexit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage.
Do you like him?
Yes.
Yes!
He says what he thinks.
And do you agree with Brexit?
Yes.
Yeah.
There we are, they agree with Brexit. Ben, fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. I know it's a strenuous job, Ben, but try and have some fun along the way. That's Ben Leo down on the Gold Coast. He looks pretty comfortable, doesn't he? Seems to me. Well, there's been all sorts of chat in the newspapers and everywhere, and as you were just saying about Lorraine Kelly and many others, sort of looking at it. Matt's cartoon today was quite extraordinary in the Telegraph. Just take a look at this. Eating bugs in a box full of snakes. To be fair to Remainers, it's what they said would happen if we voted Brexit. Matt is absolutely brilliant. Moving on to other What the Farage moments. Goodness me, well, Nigel didn't look very comfortable or as though he was enjoying that meal yesterday. What I do know, he loves a bit of lamb. And this morning at 6:30, I was down at Smithfield Market, with the bosses down there. They were showing me around the whole market. Absolutely amazing. And I've got a picture here of me with a couple of the bosses of Smithfield Market, and we're in one of the traders' stores there, and behind us there are the finest lambs going to the finest hotels and restaurants here in London. Nigel would, I mean, his mouth will be salivating at that lamb as opposed to eating those organs that he had to eat last night. Now, some more Brexit bad news I've got for you, and this is the final What the Farage moment, and Nigel will pick this up when he is back, because Lord Cameron, yes, we must get used to his new title, he, of course, is been in the job. I think he's just had his robes ennobled yesterday, I think it was. He's been in the job for just over a week, but already we are seeing that there is a shift, and I'm hearing concerning indications that he is green-lighting a sort of cozying up by the civil servants in the Foreign Office to officials in Brussels with the European Union. There's a tweet that gives it away. There is a very senior official from the Foreign Office meeting a very senior official in the EU. You might say, well, that might have been in the diary for ages. My sources tell me, and this we're going to keep an eye on, that already they are looking to get closer in cooperation, particularly with regard to defence, where actually there are no new agreements, there's no transparency of what's being talked about. I guess we're not surprised by what Lord Cameron might be doing, but I tell you what, we're going to keep a very, very close eye. That's my final What the Farage. Coming up after the break, another absolute shocker today at the COVID inquiry. There is Sir Chris Whitty. We'll be looking at hearing what he had to say. Yesterday, of course, was Patrick Vallance. I'll be talking about that with my next guest straight after the break.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, Argentina's new PM vows to take the Falklands back. Do we need to do everything to tell him hands off? There are. Plus, Phil the Power Taylor backs Nigel in more ways than one.
Nigel Farage is good at politics. I like him. I'd vote for him if he was Prime Minister, trust me.
Find out what he had to say about Farage Down Under as tune in to the most exciting pay-per-view anywhere on the telly. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11. Be there.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage, the last segment of the show before Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, comes at 8 o'clock. Yeah, he'll be talking about the autumn statement tomorrow. But, of course, the ongoing COVID inquiry. Don't worry, you might miss it. I think it's going to last somewhere between 4 and 6 or 7 years. It might cost a couple of £100 million. We need to find out whether actually it's fit for purpose. Let's just take a listen to, before we go to my guests, Sir Chris Whitty, his evidence today, a critical point in today's evidence.
I was very aware that we essentially had 2 different things we were trying to balance. The risk of going too early, in which case you get all the damages from this with actually fairly minimal impact on the epidemic, and the risk of going too late, in which case you get all the problems of the pandemic running away. Now, as we will, I'm sure, come on to, my view is, with the benefit of hindsight, we went a bit too late on the first wave, and I've been very clear about that for some time.
I have to say, I thought that was really telling, because the question that Sir Chris Whitty asked was, we had to weigh up the risk of going too early and the risk of going too late. And yet all the chat amongst the establishment, the politicians, the experts, the chair of the inquiry, the barrister of the inquiry, seems to have been, did we lock down too late? Did we lock down too late? There you've got Sir Chris Whitty worrying that they might lock down too early. So it seems to me fundamentally that actually this inquiry, which should be looking at all of the evidence, should they have locked down at all, for example, they're focusing on did we lock down too late, and yet actually Sir Chris Whitty is saying we were worried about locking down too early. Well, I'm delighted to be joined as my first guest down the line on this by Dr. Chris Smith, consultant virologist and presenter of The Naked Scientist. Chris, thanks for being with me on the Farage Show. Obviously, this inquiry is ongoing, but evidence from people like Sir Chris Whitty, Patrick Vallance, absolutely critical. They were central within it. They were the experts, the best science, we were told, in the world. What do you think of this inquiry so far? I mean, it's very long-lasting, it's very expensive, it's going to take years. But I've got to ask the simple question. Chris, is it fit for purpose?
I thought yesterday was pretty illuminating. Obviously, we had Patrick Vallance's diary, and therefore it was a bit more inflammatory and exciting. We had that to go on, whereas today was a bit more pedestrian because it was very to the letter what was official documentation. And Chris Whitty was also singing from very much the same song sheet, so a lot of this wasn't new territory, so it wasn't quite as invigorating. But it was telling, and it started fairly interestingly with Patrick Vallance illuminating for us exactly how underprepared scientifically the civil service is, with 90% of their graduate intake being from non-STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths backgrounds, which he was sort of alluding to the fact that that will create an atmosphere which makes it less easy for scientific fact to land. Then we had the revelations about Boris Johnson leaving school at 15. Well, I wasn't so surprised, leaving school at 15, stopping science rather at 15. I wasn't quite so surprised about that because lots of people stopped doing science at 15 or 16. That's why we surround ourselves with various advisors and so on. And then we had the question of how well prepared the country was. And Chris Whitty really dwelled on that, wasn't he, quite hard today, where he was saying,
when all this began to really show its true colours at the end of January, and really we began to anticipate we would have a problem, he said, well, I went and had a look at what our preparedness pandemic plans were, and he said that they were not fit for purpose.
But I remember, Chris, we were told at the time that we had one of the best pandemic plans in the world and that we were sort of gold standard by the WHO. We were reassured that all would be fine. But now we're hearing actually it was completely the opposite. It seems to me that someone hasn't been telling the truth somewhere along the line.
Well, one of the things Chris Whitty went on to say today was when he looked at that plan, it appeared to have been written by, and probably was written by, people who'd come through the swine flu pandemic. I mean, I was working in a diagnostic laboratory at the time of swine flu as well. So we got a busy but relatively easy ride. And I think he was suggesting that because we got off lightly, that people didn't take such a worst case scenario from it as perhaps they could have done. The other interesting thing missed, or not mentioned, I don't think I missed it, was that in 2016, the country ran something called Operation Cygnus. And this was under Jeremy Hunt's stewardship when he was Health Secretary. This was to pressure test our preparedness for if there was an influenza pandemic. And the wheels fell off of that completely. And if anything was going to be a warning as to what state we were in, I think it was that, to be perfectly frank. And unsurprisingly, when 3 years later COVID turned up, of course we were ill prepared because we hadn't changed anything. But
Chris,
that showed us that we were not
worse than that, because, Chris, that operation you just referred to, Operation Cygnus, it was so bad, it was a disaster. As you said, the wheels came off. They actually redacted lots of the recommendations from the report before giving it to ministers. Finally, Chris, I just got to ask this simple question. Is this inquiry asking the wrong question? They all seem to be saying, the only question is, did we lock down too late? But surely the question should be, actually, given all the factors that we now know, were we right to lock down at all, or should we have looked at the sort of thing that Sweden did?
Well, I think you've got to consider the pandemic as a whole, but also consider the outbreak in its different phases, because when it first happened, we were confronting something we knew absolutely nothing about. This was a novel enemy with novel moves. We had no idea what it was capable of. We were very much in learning mode. Once we were a bit further down the track, obviously the game changes because we've learned to play the game. We've learned what moves it's capable of. We know how it tends to perform. So there's not one rule that applies throughout the pandemic in all circumstances. And so in the first instance, most people agree that you should, until you really know what you're combating, try to stop it to the greatest extent possible. And if that means a lockdown, so be it. That doesn't mean, though, that you repeat
I get that, Chris, but the point is, the benefit of hindsight, Chris, is to look at whether or not we did the right thing at all, whether, should we have locked down as we did. But, Chris, we'll be coming back to this because there's years and years of this. But we need to know and we need to get to the truth. And I want to know if we were misled or lied to. That's Dr. Chris Smith. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, finally, I'm going to go to Molly Kingsley, who's the co-author of The Accountability Deficit and co-founder of the Children's campaign group Us For Them. Molly, good evening. Thanks for being with us. I know you are following this inquiry closer than most people. You've been very focused on it. What do you think of these 2 days of critical evidence from Patrick Vallance and Sir Chris Whitty?
Yeah, I think they've been really interesting days. There's so much we could say and we've only got limited time, but I think for me, actually, from today's testimony, the most interesting thing was that actually Whitty comes across quite sensible in the scheme of things. He was obviously very focused on the harms that would flow from lockdown and other interventions, very worried about that. He's being very criticised for being, the delayer, is what he called him repeatedly. And, that was a morally culpable position for him to have taken. We were left in no doubt of that. I think just addressing some of the questions with your last guest, is the inquiry asking the right? No, it is not. And, almost every week that goes on, I know many others have become more and more concerned about this because we still have no discussion of the real meat of the issue. Did lockdowns and other interventions work? Did benefits outweigh harms? And the reason for that is because the inquiry has been almost myopically focused on harms flowing from the virus.
Absolutely right. And I was fascinated by this point from Chris Whitty. They were worried about locking down too early. That's literally the first time that I can recall hearing that. And yet everybody else in this inquiry seems to be totally focused on locking down too late. Given everything you're seeing...
It was notable, Richard, that Hugo O'Keefe actually said to Whitty that he'd made a devastating mistake, I think were the words that he'd used with that view. And actually, you know, it was a brave acknowledgement, I thought, from Whitty. He's very much going against, well, not against, but, you know, it's not entirely what Valance said yesterday. And Valance was very much clearly in favour of, you know, quicker lockdowns, harsher lockdowns, longer lockdowns.
I suppose at least Chris Whitty today did actually say that he was concerned about the impact of lockdowns on those from deprived areas and areas of deprivation, which again, is about the first time I've heard this inquiry refer to that.
It is. And actually, I mean, I never thought I would say this, but I actually felt quite sorry for Whitty today. So you really got the impression that he found himself at the centre of what was a very, very uncomfortable, you know, a deficit of governance, of ethics, of government. And, you know, he talked repeatedly that actually someone had needed to seize on this and that they needed to, you know, think about how to get it away from just the health part to the centre of politics, government. And we seem to be gathering that never happened.
No. Molly, thank you so much indeed for your thoughts on that. Almost feeling sorry for Chris Whitty relative to the others. Thank you, Molly Kingsley, from Us For Them. Turning now to, of course, the next hour. Jacob, lovely to have you back after your hard work in the House of Commons last night. We were watching you sort of in front of the slightly empty chamber. You must tell me, did they pass the amendment? I mean, you worked so hard on it.
The amendment hasn't been passed, but the government is going to introduce a statutory instrument to have broadly the same effect. So this was about creating pressure to make sure that we don't all get debanked.
Do you feel vindicated with your hard work?
I think it was worth doing, and I think it was really important, and that Nigel highlighted something that's happening to lots of other people. It's not just about Nigel. The SNP had a go at me saying, all you're doing is supporting your posh friends. My posh friends were chewing viscera of unmentionable animals, but leaving that to one side, it's not just about Nigel, it's about my constituents who get
Big
hit
day
by
tomorrow,
this.
the autumn statement. What is the key thing you want to hear from the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, I would like to see a tax abolished, and I think that should be death duties, but I'd also like to see him increase the VAT threshold to help small businesses. It's one of the real burdens to small businesses.
And what about the personal income tax threshold? Because for me, that affects the least well-off, the lowest paid the most, and would have the greatest sort of economic growth factor.
I actually think it was one of the great things the coalition did, was to raise the threshold to £12,500, because taking people out of tax is a good thing to do. The question is there the money to do it? I think what you do has to be funded. We can't do it on the never. This country is already
But we're
in
told
too
he's
much
found
debt.
lots of headroom.
Well, £20 billion of headroom is not a huge amount in terms of government financing, so you want to use it for affordable things. But I'm going to be giving a shadow budget in my monologue. What would I do if I had this money?
A MOG budget. Absolutely fantastic. Have a great show. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow night. It is, of course, the all-important weather coming up.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It'll be staying cloudier through tomorrow with some rain moving in from the north, but still some sunshine on offer across southern areas with that high pressure still dominating, the ridge extending across many areas of England and Wales. But further north, we've got a weather front in charge throughout this evening, and that'll stay in charge into Wednesday and Thursday as well. So we've got rain arriving across much of western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. Further south, it'll stay dry tonight, some mist and fog developing and temperatures falling lower than last night, as low as 2 or 3 perhaps in some southern counties. So a bit of a colder, mistier start on Wednesday morning, but the sunshine will come out throughout the afternoon once again, so not a bad day for the time of year. Rather different story though further north, with some rain persisting, particularly across the far north of Scotland, the northwest in particular, where the rain totals will start to build up. But despite the rain, it will be fairly mild for the time of year, as high as 14 degrees in northeastern Scotland. Then Thursday, there's little change for many areas, apart from the far north, where that front does then clear through, and we've got much colder air behind it, so we could see some snow showers starting to fall over the hills, and generally there just will be a cold feel to the wind. That cold feel will become more widespread into Friday and will last into the weekend, with temperatures falling to single figures.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us